Hey there, Colts fans. This is Nathan Brown, your Colts insider with the Indianapolis Star, here with my coworker on the beat, and here for a take two edition of the Colts Cover 2 podcast, First Impressions edition. Had a little technical snafu, so we are retaping this. It is now midday on Tuesday. We saw the Colts lose in disappointing fashion to the 49ers 48-27 last night, about 12 hours or so ago. Still lots of thoughts and maybe even some more refined, more thorough and thoughtful thoughts with a few hours of sleep under our belts. So we'll get right to it. First Impressions podcast. We will kick things off with our villain of the game, a game that the Colts again lose by 21. In a really solid performance by the offense as a whole, particularly Phillip Rivers in his second game with the Colts after nearly 5 years away. Your villain of the game, Joel.
Well, my villain of the game right now is technology for not supporting our efforts to stay up and give the people the podcast they wanted in a Monday morning. Not really sure what happened. We're redoing it, so maybe this is a second impressions podcast. Maybe this is
sure.
This is maybe a second impressions podcast. My villain of the game, really, I think it just comes down to Chris Ballard. He made some decisions this offseason. There's a lot of stuff that he was praised for changing the way he did things in the secondary. I think injury for the most part has neutralized those moves. The move for Charvarius Ward, for the move for Sauce Gardner. That's not what I have the issue with, though. The issue is that defensive performance last night came down to the things that were issues that have been issues all season. The inability to get any edge rush and the inability to cover anybody over the middle. And that's two spots that Ballard decided to stand pat. They bet heavily on Latu taking a huge step forward. They went with him and then essentially a bunch of guys who are run stoppers who can give you some second effort type sacks. It has not worked out. Latu has 7.5 sacks. That feels misleading because he could still, in theory, get to 10, but it's kind of a hollow 10, in my opinion. If he was able to get there, and then just Kwity Paye should be mentioned here. He was a first round pick too. I had kind of written him off in my head because in my head, this is who he is. He's a run stopper who can give you some second effort if someone else does the hard work. He hasn't been able to do that. And then the linebackers, the middle of the defense, it just the way San Francisco attacked them. I just think that we've seen that all season. Like we saw that in the Chiefs game. They didn't want to throw outside. They were able to make a lot of yards and stuff by going up the middle, isolating those linebackers. They did it start to finish. Kyle Shanahan was like, "This is an easy game plan for me," and that really comes down to Ballard. They felt like in the offseason that there weren't any viable options in free agency or the draft. And there is some merit to that at linebacker, but at the same time, you got to find somebody better than Jermaine Pratt in this role and something like, to be able to cover. Because Zaire Franklin hasn't been able to cover for a couple of years now. So you could probably make a case that's never been really why he's in the lineup anyway. So I think that's probably a synopsis there of just where Ballard left this defense weak and how it hurt them last night.
Yeah, it was an interesting way that the game played out, and I'm not sure that it really should be all that surprising when we think about it, but there was a lot of attention obviously focused on the idea that the Colts again would be without their two starting cornerbacks, Charvarius Ward and Sauce Gardner. Sauce now missing essentially a fourth game. He did play the first two defensive snaps of the Colts loss on November 30th to the Texans, and then has missed 3 full games since then. Of course, losses to the Jaguars, the Seahawks, and now the 49ers. There's notably those guys, 2 All-Pros in their own right, get a lot of attention when they're not on the field. But this wasn't a team in San Francisco that really had some true game changers, I would say, at the receiver position. They have some strong strong playmakers there, some who made some pretty notable performances on Sunday night when they're playing against undrafted free agents and guys right off the street from earlier this year, and Jonathan Edwards and Cam Mitchell. But this is a San Francisco offense that's is dominated by guys who play all over the middle of the field, and that's in Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle at running back and tight end. I think they combined for 261 yards of offense. I think San Francisco had 440, so you're talking more than half of the all-purpose yards that group put together, along with multiple touchdowns. When you look at them, it was a defensive performance that the Colts just couldn't have when you got probably as much as you could have asked for on the offense. My villain of the game kind of dovetails in that, and I would say I think you could say the linebacking core as a whole, but know that Zaire Franklin is bit of team. And this is a game where, even though, as you mentioned, it's not necessarily his strength, he got burned so many times, especially in that first half. It felt like when the Colts were trying to keep up in this track meet with San Francisco, you kept seeing his jersey number a couple steps behind Kittle, or trying to chase down Christian McCaffrey on a big gain of 10 or 20 yards, and it was just a continuous thing. And it was the type of performance that you just couldn't have from someone, a veteran like him, who's been in these types of games so often. A virtual must have it, must win type game, a primetime game. The Colts have now lost each of their last 6 appearances on Monday Night Football. Certainly something to say about why this team doesn't get more of those primetime opportunities when they seemingly don't show up for them of late. And Zaire is a guy that you would look to, who would know the gravity of this moment, and you would just hope would be able to dig deep and find another gear to just keep this San Francisco offense in check a little bit and allow an offense that should be noted is on its 3rd quarterback and still competing in games late in the season. And they just weren't able to do that. Zaire spoke to us after the game. He said, and I think it's a quote that you and I both take issue with, that this was a team that had issues in all 3 phases of the game. You could certainly say that in special teams with a fumbled kickoff return early in the game that basically gifted San Francisco 7 points. The defenses had issues that we've talked about ad nauseum now for 7 minutes. But the offense, I think, met the moment. Certainly Phillip Rivers did. The run game was not entirely there, as it hasn't been for the better part of a month and a half. But I think if I had to pick one person from that defensive unit, he is the guy that I put this loss on his shoulders.
Yeah, we both thought that was an odd quote. And I know the running game wasn't the same, but like they also only had one guy playing in the correct position on the offensive line after they lost Tanner Bortolini to a concussion on the 2nd play of the game. Just kind of an odd in the middle of a press conference too, where he took a lot of responsibility for everything, and then he just had to. I don't know. It was an odd non sequitur to a question. The interception late, I mean, maybe you think about that, but like they were down 41-27. If they score on that drive, they're still down 41-34 with 3.5 minutes left, and a defense that outside of Cam Bynum's interception hadn't stopped the 49ers all day. So yeah, I didn't fully understand that. I think that's an obvious villain of the game. Where do you want to go next? You want to go to hero of the game or unsung?
Yeah, let's go hero of the game. Who was yours?
I went with Alec Pierce. Here. I think that ages well. The first 2 touchdowns scored by Alec Pierce, just a reminder of how good he is on contested catches, stuff that isn't perfect. Phillip Rivers' second ball. I think Phillip Rivers said after the game that he felt like those 2 touchdown catches were more about the catch than the throw. The second one in particular felt kind of wobbly, and that's going to be an incompletion. And then Pierce made it look really easy. He's only got 43 catches on the season. I think that's more a function of the offense than anything, because he still has an outside shot at 1,000 yards. And I think I've said this on this pod before. I think he's the best receiver on the team.
Yeah.
He's the best. He's the best receiver on the team. I don't really think there's a question about that anymore.
No, he is the guy you go to. Not only that you go to, but when you see the ball going his directions on deep balls down the field, I feel like you have more faith that he's going to come down with it, frankly, than Michael Pittman Jr. for all of his strengths. We saw the first throw of the game, I think a ball that traveled 46 yards in the air. It wasn't a perfect throw, and Pittman was covered fairly well, but that's just one of those plays where you think maybe there's a little bit better odds that Alec Pierce could come down with a ball like that in a contested catch situation than Pittman. Those catches you mentioned, incredible. I think he finished the game 4 catches for 86 yards. Again, more than 21 yards per catch, continuing to be the best deep threat in the league on average. You wish they had some more opportunities to get to him a little more, but this was a game where they were able to do a little bit more of that. He only had 1 target, only 1 catch in Seattle. A really important 17-yard catch to push the offense down the field and help set up that field goal that gave the Colts the lead for a couple seconds there last Sunday. But Rivers, after that game in Seattle, talked about a little bit of regret in wanting to get Pierce involved a little bit more. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 opportunities in that game where he felt like he made a different decision and would have maybe liked to get the ball to Pierce, and he got it to him early and often. Started the game, I think, with maybe 3 catches for 53 yards and 2 touchdowns, either in the first quarter or just barely outside the first quarter. And he was part of why that offense got rolling so well. 121 passing yards for Rivers in the first quarter alone, after a game where he had 120 total in Seattle through 4 quarters. So I think a very deserving choice there. My hero of the game goes to Phillip Rivers. We spent this week questioning the veracity of the statements from him and from Shane Steichen and offensive coordinator Jim Bob Cooter about whether this offense really did have more verticality in it. They gave us answers that I think you almost kind of have to give, whether there's truth in it or not. You're not just going to say publicly out in the open, no, we're going to have to continue dumping the ball off half the time behind the line of scrimmage, or no more than 5 or 6 yards downfield, even if that's all you can do. But Rivers showed that he can air the ball out a little bit. He's never going to be someone who's going to constantly threaten you with, throws of 30, 40 yards downfield multiple times a drive, but it was there occasionally. I don't know that they connected on his 2 longest throws of the day, but there was a really great throw to Alec Pierce, maybe later on in the first half or early in the second half. Can't quite remember where that one fell, but I think that one went for somewhere around 30 yards. Had some great crossers over the middle to Tyler Warren, Michael Pittman. There was just there was a lot more potency to this offense on Sunday, and there was going to need to be, admittedly, for this Colts team to be able to keep up. For everything that Seattle is great at, they really just have one very good, consistent receiving threat in Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then of course a guy in Rashid Shaheed that can threaten you at times, but isn't someone that you maybe have to account for throughout the entirety of a game. George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey, you have to know where they are on the field at all times, and they are always threats to score. And so this offense against a Gus Bradley defense that's, I think I wrote in a story last night, fairly blasé, is willing to give you a lot over the middle, is willing to give you some short stuff. This Colts offense was needing not only to do more of what they did last week, but kind of push the issue and turn this into maybe not a total track meet, but just be able to keep up with San Francisco, if that's kind of what it turned into, and that it is exactly what it was. And they were able to hold strong-ish for, I'd say, 3 quarters in a position where they still were going to probably need a defensive stop or two, and outside Cam Bynum's interception and the crossbar that helped him out on a 64-yard field goal to end the first half. The Colts were not able to do that, but that was to no fault of Phillip Rivers, who finished the game with over 270 yards passing, nearly 66% completion percentage, 2 touchdown passes, and as you mentioned, that one interception at the end of the game that was one you would want to have back, but something that is going to happen every so often, and he just credited to a great play by the San Francisco linebacker.
Yeah, Rivers, I think, for the second consecutive game surprised us in a different way. That's when they sign him, you don't think, really, I didn't think much of it. I shouldn't say that. I thought a lot of it in terms of like, it was a great story. I didn't think I expected it to kind of work for this team offensively 2 weeks in a row, at least in terms of the plan that they were playing.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, he's got nearly, I think it's just a couple yards short of 400 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, has 2 interceptions, both of them coming late in the game, frankly, when the Colts were kind of out of it at the point in both of those. Yes, if those turn into catches, maybe they come out with one of those games, but it was pretty unlikely, particularly last night. I don't think you could have asked for anything more from him, and I certainly don't think you could have expected anything more from anyone else that you would have signed off the off the couch, someone who was on someone else's practice squad, or frankly Riley Leonard, the 6th round pick, rookie on the Colts at the moment, for everything that could be in front of him for his career. I just don't know that you would think that Riley Leonard would be able to go for 400 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 somewhat inconsequential interceptions, given where the game was at that point. So we've talked ad nauseum about what the options were and why the Colts went that direction. But the fact that they were able to plug such an important hole and at least give this team a chance to win games that they needed to win in order to keep their playoff hopes alive, lots of credit to Rivers.
Unsung villain.
Trying to remember what direction I went with this last night. You go ahead if you have someone off the top of your head, and I'll think a little bit more on
it. I think unsung. You don't want to go Lou Anarumo because I think he's pretty sung as far as villain goes. I'm going to put the corners. And some of this comes down to I don't really understand what some of the playing time distribution was. Not only did Jalen Jones only get 4 snaps, and that's very confusing to me. It'll come up in a later category, but also Kenny Moore took fewer snaps than Cameron Mitchell, Jonathan Edwards, or Mekhi Blackman. And I know Kenny Moore maybe didn't look the same in coverage last night, but in the middle of the game, I actually looked up his stats for the season. He's at a very respectable 81.6 passer rating when he's the closest defender in coverage. It's not like he's dropped all the way off the map. At least the numbers don't support that. He did have some rough numbers last night, I think. But I still would rather have him out there than Cameron Mitchell, or John, or really any of those 3. So I don't really know what's going on there with the rotations. I'm kind of making this about Anarumo, but also, they attacked the middle of the field. They had a ton of yards to McCaffrey and Kittle, but where they also got a ton of crossers and stuff when they needed it, out routes, that kind of thing. Mekhi Blackman, for being the speed guy, I think you mentioned this at one point during the game, for being the speed guy, he's often trailing.
Yeah.
And that speaks to why the Vikings were willing to let him go. Cameron Mitchell's a guy off the street. Jonathan Edwards, I do think there's something there, but he's an undrafted free agent, and you're just not going to get much out of him. So yeah, I don't know. I think I'll go with the corners in this unsung villain piece of it.
Yeah. Mine, I don't know that this really entirely rests on him, but the run game, you would have liked to have gotten a little bit more out of that. That doesn't entirely rest on Jonathan Taylor's shoulders, but there were some moments on Monday night where I just felt like an earlier season version of JT, we would have just gotten a little bit more out of, whether he would have hit holes differently, made different decisions, either in some moments been a tad more patient or attacked holes a little bit more. I think he finished with 2.9 yards per rush there in a game where the Colts, it wasn't a must-have for him to really get going. The Colts, frankly, weren't looking to him all that frequently, especially early on in the game. This was really a lot about Rivers attacking that San Francisco defense. But I think in a game where you're starting to notice that the defense isn't really capable of holding its own, I think you noticed, and I think it was a correct observation, that the offense seemed like it was relying a little bit more on the run game there in the second half, when Shane Steichen maybe felt like the defense just wasn't going to be able to get off the field. So they were trying to extend drives, and there were just, moments where a drive turned into a punt that you would have liked to have gotten points off of, or a drive turned into a field goal that you would have loved to try and get a touchdown to keep up with this game. If the defense was going to play like it was, I think the offense was going to have to be just about perfect, and they didn't quite get that out of JT. Again, when you're playing with an offensive line that's just got one starter playing in his traditional position, and you're using several backups, as it may be, this wasn't going to be a situation where JT was going to have a breakout game, but the Colts needed to get more than whatever it was, 46 yards or so from him. It's pretty stark to see how, the direction that his production has turned over the last 6 weeks, and it's coincided with the Colts offense that just isn't what it was when they entered into their bye after that Week 10 win, when JT had more than 240 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns in Berlin and looked like a legitimate MVP candidate. But he's talked to us a couple times over the last, after the last couple games, about defenses making changes kind of midseason, and this offense needing to meet the moment to counterbalance those changes with changes of their own. And for whatever reason, as this past game has kind of fallen off a little bit, as they have had their quarterback issues, first with Daniel Jones's fractured fibula, and then him tearing his Achilles and needing to bring in Rivers in short notice. This run game that the Colts had really relied on to put games away in lots of moments in the first half of the year, or just help kind of keep them alive in games where other things weren't hitting on all cylinders. We just they haven't been able to rely as trustfully on that.
Yeah, the line here gives a little bit of a reason, but also, like as you point out, it's been a while since the running game looked the way it was supposed to, really since the bye.
Yeah. Pretty incredible to think about the fact that JT no longer leads the league in rushing yards.
As big of a lead as he had. Yeah.
He was leading, buys always factor into that a little bit, but there was a point where, before the bye, I think JT obviously led the league, and his yards after contact was, I think, second or third in the league. He had, I think, more than a 350-yard lead on James Cook of Buffalo at one point in there. I don't know if their buys were different, where he had technically one more game under his belt, but Cook has had some really solid games as Buffalo has held strong in their playoff positioning, potentially fighting for that opportunity to host a playoff game. They're probably going to be the 5th seed when things are all said and done. But Cook has starred, frankly, for a Buffalo offense that hasn't at times had a whole lot outside of Josh Allen. You would say that this Colts offense, although they don't have a quarterback like Josh Allen, have a lot more weapons offensively in Tyler Warren and Pittman and Alec Pierce than Buffalo does. And Cook has still been able to pick up gobs of yards in the second half of the season, taking over that rushing lead by a somewhat comfortable margin. And frankly, with the defenses that the Colts have to face to end the year, I don't know that I have a whole lot of faith that he's going to be able to get that lead back.
Yeah, I agree with that. Game day observation.
I said it last night. getting some sleep. I still stand by it. I'm not big on these Indiana Knights jerseys from the Colts. Uh, I think if you're going to have an alternate, I think it needs to be more different than your uniforms. It honestly kind of feels like um, a somewhat traditional Colts uniform, just with fewer details and weird details at that. Not a big fan of the black helmets. Very much, I don't know. I just didn't the blue jerseys just kind of look weird when they're almost they're so similar to what we normally see, them just being a hair different. I don't think it hits quite the same. I think in theory maybe it works in graphics when you put together something in a photo or a visual piece that looks right, but on the field didn't think it quite hit, and hope that the Colts can put together something else here in the future for their alternate uniforms to wear on occasion.
Yeah, I'm really against the black helmet. I don't
Yeah.
like it at all. So that's definitely part of it. For me, the game day observation was just Niners fans really showed up early.
Mm-hmm.
A ton of red in the stadium, but the when they showed up, I usually am doing TV. Not usually. I'm always when I do TV and when we do shoot our pregame videos, we are in the on the part of the sideline that's closest to the tunnel where the visiting team comes out. So we're always under the visiting fans because that's where they're trying to get autographs and stuff like that. And I don't think I've ever seen a team have as many fans there, 2 hours, 1.5 hours before the game as the Niners did. Maybe that's a primetime thing, but they played the Steelers in primetime a couple years ago, and I don't remember it being quite like that. So I think that's the thing I just took away was, man, 49ers fans were really there, and they're early.
Yeah, and I think there were moments where I think you could even hear that in the stadium a little bit. Certainly, I wouldn't say that this was a pro 49ers crowd by any stretch, but when San Francisco did great things on the field, it wasn't as if the crowd was either silent or you heard just like resounding frustration from the crowd. It was very mixed, and I think that's credit to San Francisco for traveling well. This is a team that still has everything out front of them. I think if they win out, if memory serves me right, I think they can actually get the number one seed in the NFC. So this is a team that has a ton to play for, and they looked every bit the part on Monday night, and their fans traveled like it too.
Football things that gave me joy. Number one football thing that gave me joy for the second consecutive week, it's a Phillip Rivers touchdown celebration. This one was better even than the one in Seattle. It involved kicking of the legs and like a little bit of a dance. It's been awesome in terms of. I do think that's the one thing about this Colts season is that there's a little bit of fun in the way Phillip Rivers is playing, and a little bit of joy in the way I think in terms of things that give Phillip Rivers joy, football is like tops on that list, and you can see it come out in the way he plays.
Agreed. We don't get to see it all that often. The doink of a football and a crossbar makes a very unique sound. I think you could put that, isolate that sound, put it on a track of some sort, and ask me what it is. And I think it's very clear. We see that there toward the end of the first half as the San Francisco 49ers drive and put Eddie Pinheiro with a chance to hit a 64-yard field goal to tack 3 more points on the board. And he comes up, probably a half yard or a yard short. I think we talked about this a week or two ago about how fun it is to watch a super duper long distance field goal attempt, whether you're watching an away crowd do it or a home crowd do it. There's always a lot of suspense. The fact that that field goal kickers in the NFL can stand. I mean, he was literally lining up beyond the 50-yard line to try to kick it through uprights that I think when you're standing there, I just can't fathom how that looks possible. And he had it absolutely on line. It needed a tiny bit more. Again, I think legitimately if they set up 1 yard closer, And this is a 63-yarder. I think it probably, maybe it still connects with the uprights and maybe just gets the opposite bounce and pushes it through the last little bit. But those are always fun to watch. And seeing doinks is something that you don't often see.
Yeah, and it was a loud one. Like
Mm-hmm.
because of where it hit it was a thicker part of the bar. It made a really loud one. Thing number 2 over the years, Alec Pierce's just aggression towards the football when it's in the air, and watching him go get the ball has become a source of football joy. You see a lot of receivers who kind of expect the ball to come to them. Alec Pierce treats it as if the ball has been placed in his area for him to go get. He did it on both touchdown passes. It's fun to watch whenever there's a ball in the air and Pierce has a chance at it, because he's going to try to go get the ball.
My second one, I think we had maybe a little bit of an inkling, although it still caught us by surprise nonetheless. Seeing the Colts, as they get the opening kickoff or win the coin toss, take the opening kickoff, as Shane Steichen often has throughout this season, especially with these new kickoff rules. Colts get the ball first, and immediately we see Rivers drop back and just launch one to Michael Pittman. I again believe that ball traveled well over 40 yards in the air from where Phillips threw it to where it landed somewhere around Pittman. Again, not a completion, but the idea, it was a throw and a play call that definitely felt like this Colts team had been hearing what we had been saying, the questions we had been asking all week about whether there was more verticality to be had. And probably in some ways too, I think assumed that San Francisco knew that they knew that San Francisco didn't like to give up deep balls and wasn't planning on it, and was probably expecting a lot of stuff over the middle and kind of in the short and intermediate range. And they launch one and kind of set the tone, I think, for those first couple drives. Outside of turning the ball over on a kickoff fumble, the Colts score 2 touchdowns, both of those to Pierce fairly quickly. And a lot of that came from not necessarily completing 40-yard passes, but a lot more beyond 15 yards. This was a very different look of an offense. Last weekend, this was, we will run it every chance we get, and when we have to, we will throw the ball. And even when we are throwing it, again, half of Rivers' completions last week were behind the line of scrimmage, and there was a lot more pace to this offense. There was some more rhythm to it, particularly in the passing game, and it just kind of moved and flowed a little bit more, I guess you would say, regularly, kind of how you would expect an NFL offense to. And that early warning shot, I think, kind of set the tone.
Yeah, my number 3 is going to be another Rivers thing. It's just fun to watch a quarterback. It's fun to watch his brain work. People have made a lot about the arm, and obviously the arm, it is not pretty to watch the throw. Sometimes when it comes out, it's not pretty. Some of those deep balls were pretty ugly. But to fully understand when he throws stuff, knowing that he has to make up for that arm, and understanding that guys are going to come open and where they're going to come open and where he has to place the ball, it's pure poetry in terms of quarterbacking and just the way his brain works. And I think that's something that's it's really hard to see. I've gotten lucky enough to cover 2 quarterbacks like that. Drew Brees was the same way, but it's just impressive to see, like, Phillip Rivers really does see football. Like, he hasn't played in 5 years, and he's still ahead of the defense and what they're going to do and where guys are going to be and where a guy is going to get to his route. It just kind of a savant at work.
Mm-hmm. My third football thing that gave me joy, kind of related to my second one there. We didn't see this as much, I think, beyond kind of those first couple drives, but and this is, again, I think, something that if you listened to Shane Steichen and Phillip Rivers and kind of took some of really truly trusted what they were telling us early in the week and took it to heart. Seeing this team play a hurry up, no huddle offense early and often throughout the first quarter there really caught the San Francisco 49ers off guard. I don't know that you would have expected the Colts to do that, but Rivers showed that he's still got a good bit of stamina. He was, not only able just to physically keep up, but he was keeping the Colts in the right plays and making the checks at the line and finding some vulnerabilities in that San Francisco defense. And frankly, wonder what the offense might have looked like at times if they had relied upon that a little bit more. Again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know that they were really wanting that type of offensive attack in the second half because they were trying to keep the defense off the field as much as possible and not wanting to go and score a quick field goal and then give the ball right back to San Francisco and allow them to likely score a touchdown and let that lead continue to grow. But when it was flowing in rhythm, it felt like you were watching a Phillip Rivers from 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. This did not feel like a guy who had been retired for nearly 5 years. And that was cool to watch. Very different from the quarterback that we watched last Sunday. I think there were still a lot of questions going into this game. How much of what we saw in Seattle was truly just game plan management and how much of it was just about all that Rivers could do. And he showed us that there was a lot more still to be found, and we'll have to see what he has in store for us against Jacksonville and Houston, if he, of course, is the quarterback the rest of the way.
I forgot number of the day. We forgot number of the day. We got to go back to it.
Yes. Okay. My number of the day is 1. That is the number of times the Colts hit Brock Purdy. It was on Latu Latu's strip sack early in the game. A strip sack where San Francisco actually gained yards, if you can believe it. It kind of was just that type of defensive night for the Colts. They did not have any other quarterback hits, and it really kind of felt like that. Brock Purdy could pretty much do what he wanted out there. They had him scrambling a little bit. DeForest Buckner, I think, forced a good amount of those in his first game back since November 2nd when he played against Pittsburgh, when he ultimately suffered his neck injury that kept him on the sidelines for a month and a half. But they just weren't able to get home and knock Purdy much off his spots, make him feel uncomfortable, rush throws. And that was, I think, large in part why he was able to carve up that Colts defense as much as he did, whether it be with dump offs to McCaffrey or finding McCaffrey over the middle or finding Kittle along the sidelines. They were kind of, for the most part, able to do what they wanted. And I think the lack of pressure from that defensive front seven and particularly the defensive line played a big role in that.
The number for me is 4. It's the Shio Kapadia from the Athletic tweeted that the Colts defense posted the 4th worst defensive performance of the season in terms of EPA per drive. That's an advanced analytics way of saying it was just as bad as you thought. It was just as bad as it felt like during the game. Shane Steichen seemed a little shell-shocked when he was talking about the defense after the game, that just in how bad it was. But the numbers and the advanced statistics back that up as well.
That's a good one. Too much blame for this Colts loss. Who do you hand that out to?
Oh, too much blame sometimes is a little bit difficult with these games because you feel like everyone's getting exactly the right amount of blame. Maybe the running game or maybe the offensive line, just because they didn't have anybody. They lose Tanner Bortolini. It's Quentin Nelson. Dalton Tucker has 8 starts in his career at right guard, but as we all know, they had to replace him last year. Matt Gonzalez hasn't played tackle at all this season. He moves out to right tackle. Jalen Travis, that's a tough spot for them to be in. I think it's worthwhile that running game, because there was a point there in the second half where, for you to go unsung villain, because there was a point there in the second half where Shane Steichen was trying to essentially just play keep away because he didn't think his defense could stop San Francisco, and they couldn't do it. But in terms of you kind of expect that if you tell me that they're going to essentially play what was a number 2 offensive line from a preseason game with Quentin Nelson.
Yeah. That's a good one there. For me, too much blame. I feel like, I don't know how many fans were looking at this or pointing to this, but there is certainly um, a segment of the fan base that, is pushing back on the idea that the Colts just need to burn this entire thing to the ground. Get rid of Shane Steichen after 3 years, fire Chris Ballard after nearly a decade, and the opponents to that, I think, would point to the injuries, holding the Colts back, and being the reason why this team has fallen apart. Why they started 7-1 and have gone 1-6 since then. I felt like the team that rolled out on the field on Monday night was a group that should have been able to stay in this game. I don't think that you can overlook the impact that injuries have had overall, but I don't know that is why, or is the focal point to why the Colts lost this game. Certainly in the fashion that they did on Monday night, there are some real deep-seated issues there on the defense, but in particular, that need to be figured out there, and whether Chris Ballard will be the one to do it, or whether it's someone else, we'll find out here in a couple weeks. But I don't think that this is a game where injuries should be looked at as the reason the Colts lost this one and lost it in the fashion that they did. So I will say injuries maybe in some segments of the fan base are taking too much blame this morning.
Too little blame for me goes to Lou Anarumo. And I know he's getting a lot of blame, but I think it's even worse because he spent the offseason telling us, I'm going to play dime, I'm going to play matchups. He said at one point, we had a lengthy discussion about how he doesn't like to play linebackers on tight ends. He thinks that age has passed. But he hasn't done that. He hasn't backed up his words by doing that. And the number, maybe I was 4, so it's also the same number as my actual number of the game. But that's the number of snaps Jalen Jones played. The Colts just do not trust him for whatever reason. I know he had a bad game in Jacksonville, but he's got 2,000 snaps under his belt. But even in the Colts not trusting him, Jerome Henderson told me the other day, we see Jalen Jones as the guy who goes against the elite pass catching tight ends in the league. That's George Kittle. How is he not on the field? I don't understand. After spending all that time talking about how we're going to play matchups and we're going to get defensive backs on the field and everything like that, and then you leave early in the game, you leave Jermaine Pratt and Zaire Franklin out there together to cover a team that's uniquely suited to attack you over the middle because they have a great tight end and a pass-catching running back who's probably going to have a 1,000 season. I just don't fully understand the disconnect there between his words and what he's done. And I think that the most obvious explanation is just it's a player evaluation thing that they don't think Jones can play. But you got to try something. If I could see this coming, and if you go back and listen to our podcast last week, you could tell that, like I was saying, that also same thing with like some of the stuff I wrote. Like this team was uniquely suited to attack the middle of the Colts defense because of who they had. If I can see that, Lou Anarumo should be supposed to be able to see that. His other thing is take their best players away. I just named their 2 best players. So do something more creative. Use the guy who's supposedly your tight end stopper. Do something else rather than just running out 2 guys that we know just frankly are not that great in coverage.
It's a good one. For me, too little blame. Again, I don't know in a game that you lose by 21 points that it plays a big role, but at a time where this was already turning into kind of a back and forth game, Amir Abdullah's fumble on the kickoff after San Francisco knotted it at 7 apiece early in the game, really kind of put the Colts, I think, on the back foot for the rest of the game. When you fumble there inside the 30 or 35, you give San Francisco an incredibly short field, and they made pretty quick work of that. And all of a sudden you go from leading 7-0 the last time that Phillip Rivers touched a ball to being down 14-7 before the offense has even had a chance to take another snap make another play. It's a tough position to be in when you see the defense play like it was. Again, I'm not excusing what the defense did on Monday night. They needed more from that. But if you were already going to kind of write in what that defense was going to look like, and the way in which the offense kind of petered off a little bit in the second half, you just can't have some other mistakes around the fringes like that. And that was one that, I don't think we knew quite in the moment how big of that was going to be. And again, when you lose by 3 touchdowns, giving up one extra one isn't necessarily going to make or break it, but it kind of just began to set the tone for a game that the 49ers were going to have an upper hand in. And ultimately, the Colts were going to need to come up with something similar of their own, and they didn't get a turnover until Cam Bynum's interception there with under 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, of course, before the Colts ultimately turned it over themselves. And the game was kind of already out of hand. But that was just not something that you can afford in a pivotal kind of must-win game like this. You can't afford any extra mistakes, and that was just one that the Colts couldn't really have.
That brings us to the last 2 categories, one to throw away and one to go on. We always start this one with one to throw away because you throw it away. This one gets a little hard later in the season because the team starts to solidify. But what's one of the things we're talking about now that maybe we can toss from the game?
Yeah, I think among the issues that this team has had, and now I'll switch gears. We're talking, at least we have a little bit about the Colts, and their playoff hopes. I don't know that this is something that we're going to really touch on anymore, frankly, because I think there's a very decent likelihood that the Houston Texans go and beat the Chargers on Saturday, and what I think should be on paper a great game. 2 teams that are playing some incredible football right now, along with Jaguars. All 3 of those teams have won 6 out of their last 7. All teams that the Colts have kind of in some different ways been jockeying with for playoff positioning, as the Colts have lost 5 straight and 6 of 7. Those teams have won 6 of 7. But if the Texans ultimately win that game, beat the Chargers, I think 1% playoff chances that the Colts have, according to the Athletics playoff simulator, will be completely extinguished. And that will be something that we won't be talking about anymore in any fashion once we get to our first impressions pod next weekend.
My one to throw away is that this version of Tyler Warren, the one that's caught, it looks like 11 passes in the last 4 games, doesn't have over 100 yards in those games, is the actual version of Tyler Warren. I just think that, with a rookie, what you do is you give them a set thing, and you don't necessarily usually even the best ones, even a guy like Warren. But I think it applies to Warren because of how varied his role is anyway. You give him a certain part of the offense and emphasize that. And the thing they emphasized with him was like movement, the quarterback, bootlegs, using his motion to mimic the quarterback. I think that's probably as good an explainer for what's gone on with his pass catching as anything else, because the last time he really made a huge impact on a game was 5 catches for 45 yards against Kansas City. I think that's one of, if you think about that, that's the first fractured fibula game. They really haven't had mobility at quarterback in the same way since then. And yeah, I think that's the biggest piece of what's going on with him. I don't think it's he got hot early and he's useless going forward, which is something I've seen kind of bandied about online.
Yeah, that's a good one to go on here. I think from a big picture standpoint, I think there are a lot of questions to be answered. They're obviously going to crop up all across Colts social media, particularly on X after a game like we had on Monday Night Football, a must-win game that the Colts lose at home by 21 points. But there are, one way or another, the Irsay sisters, Carly Irsay Gordon, at the top as the team's leader, is going to have to answered these questions, once we get into this offseason, frankly, if not sooner, on who ultimately is going to lead this team into the future. I know there are wide swaths of the fan base that wish Chris Ballard had been fired several years ago. And I know there are some folks that even thought Shane Steichen should have been on his way out after 2 seasons last year, and certainly think that it's time to do so after this season, with a team that started 7-1 and has gone 1-6 since, and is certainly underdogs in each of its final 2 games of the year. I don't know that there is a right answer. I think the emotional answer of a fan, and I can understand it, is you're sick and tired of seeing this team find ways to, in certain moments, in seasons where playoffs are possible, more often than not, find ways to lose those games. And I think you can also explain away some of what we've seen over the last 2 months or so due to injuries. Again, I don't know that injuries specifically lost the Colts this game. I think they have a roster that could have won this game, but from a big picture standpoint, losing Daniel Jones, not having a truly viable backup quarterback option when he does go down, and not getting a whole lot out of giving away 2 first-round picks in the way in which they got Sauce Gardner to spark that trade deadline storyline. You can definitely argue that the group that Chris Ballard put on the field just wasn't a group that could stay together, and that he made a lot of the right decisions. And when they were healthy, Shane Steichen was leading this team as a historically great offense and a defense that could do enough to win you games. So that's without a doubt something that we are going to continue talking about into these last couple games of the year, games that I don't know that I necessarily would expect the Colts to win either of. And if that is indeed the case, you're talking about a team that goes into the offseason losing each of its last 7 games and 8 of its last 9. Types of, the type of collapse that I think we've only seen maybe 5 or 6 other times in the league over the last 50 or 60 years.
Yeah, I think the decision really comes down to, do you base it on this year or do you base it on the entire body of work with Ballard? Because if you base it on this year, he changed the way he did some things. They got off to that good start. I think you can make a very legitimate case that injuries are why the Colts are where they are and why they're collapsing. But if you look at the overarching full tenure, I can't defend that. So I think that's really what it comes down to. We're going to learn a lot from Carly Ursay-Gordon. My one to go on is just going to be that going for Phillip Rivers as your Hail Mary play was the correct decision. I think it's worked better than anybody expected. I don't really think Riley Leonard could play the same way, not at this point in his career. I'm shocked. I'm as shocked as you are that it was the right play and that it's worked out as well as it has. Because 5 years away from the game, I would have thought, you can't do it. But it's remarkable that the reason that they were even remotely in that game before the end of it yesterday was that their 44-year-old quarterback, who spent the first 3 months of the season leading St. Michael Catholic to the state semifinal as a head coach. It was the right play, and it's going to get lost in this collapse and everything else. But as far as what you do when you don't have your top 2 quarterbacks, he was their best option. They identified it and went after it, even though it was unconventional and weird, but it did work out. And I think that just from a Phillip Rivers standpoint, I think that's worth noting, even amidst the season that has gone down the tubes.
And here's maybe one thing to bring up real quick. We don't have an answer on it yet. By the time folks listen to this, we might have an answer on it. And I'll be interested to hear how Shane Steichen addresses this here on a media call that we have in a little over an hour. As I mentioned earlier, the Colts very possibly could go into their next game without any chance of having any shot at the playoffs. Those hopes could be dashed by the time they see Jacksonville at Lucas Oil on Sunday. And I wonder if that is indeed the case, if there's nothing materially to play for outside of just winning football games for the joy of going out and competing in a football game in the NFL. I wonder what the Colts do at quarterback. Shane has said, we didn't bring Phillip here to sit on the bench, but if you no longer have anything to play for. Granted, you won't know that until Saturday evening. I do wonder a little bit if Rivers does start both of these last games, or if they do give Riley Leonard any sort of a chance to kind of audition for some sort of an elevated role come next season.
Yeah, and a lot of questions that keep going as we get to the end of this season.
Yeah. All right. That will do it for our First Impressions podcast, Volume 2, off of the Colts 48-27 loss to the San Francisco 49ers. Again, a lot more to be said and to write about off of what comes next, both this week and beyond. For the Colts, is with 2 games left to go in the season. You can find all of those stories. Another podcast here coming shortly tomorrow on Indy Stars podcast platforms. Be sure to like and subscribe there to get notifications when we have another one posted, and of course like and subscribe on our YouTube channel that is continuing to grow. We just got over 1,000 subscribers there. Love to see that, and appreciate you all who are following us there, both for these podcasts, for the videos that we shoot in the locker room, and our analysis videos, and the work that we do there to cover kind of spot news when big things come down the pike. More to come this holiday week. Hope you guys all have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and we will continue to be writing about and talking about this Colts team as we get toward the end of this 2025 season.